All right. A reading from Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 36 through 39. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Later, Simon and the others went out to find him. When they found him, they said, "Everyone is looking for you." But Jesus replied, "We must go on to other towns as well. I will preach to them too. That is why I came." So he traveled throughout the region of Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. And so today, what we're going to be talking about is the idea of time. Time is this thing that we feel like we can never have enough of. You know, I didn't get enough time to sleep. I didn't get enough time to get that thing done. I just don't have time. And we know that we're supposed to sleep 8 hours a night, which means we have 16 hours to get all the things done, whatever those things are. And it just doesn't feel like enough. Now, me, myself, I struggle with not having enough time often. And I think this is because I view myself as a very capable person. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it gives me confidence. And so I view myself as a capable person in the sense of I will just add more things to my plate. Like, oh, that needs to be done too? Okay, I'll fit it in somewhere. Or, oh, yeah, you need that done? I don't have time for it, but I think, I'll just play God and create more time for it. And I do this often, and I'm always kind of teetering on the edge of burnout, which is a very unhealthy thing, and I'm just confessing that to you this morning, I think. But it's a really big blind spot in my life. Sometimes I can schedule my entire week and say, this is how I'm going to go through all the things that I have to do. And then Monday comes around, and I'm doing something completely different. And I don't even know how I got to be doing what I was doing. I don't remember saying yes. I don't remember doing that thing. And so it's something that I constantly have to work on. But, we need rest in order to do all the things. And time kind of gets in the way of that. And when I realize that I need more rest, really it's because the thoughts that I begin having begin to change. Typically, I'm a very optimistic person. I look forward to whatever's next. I'm looking forward to the future. And when I'm lacking rest, when I need rest, my thoughts begin to change. Like, oh man, I have to do that now. Or, oh, I don't know if that thing's going to work out. And I begin to notice this, and I'll catch those thoughts and say, oh no, I need to rest. I need to do something to kind of fill up my tank again. And it was very interesting. In college, ministry students were really encouraged to really take care of ourselves, to learn how to rest well, whether it's, reading a good book or taking a walk outside in nature or going to the gym and exercising, binging a show and not feeling guilty about it. We were kind of encouraged, like, hey, ministry is one of those things where sometimes you're incredibly busy and it feels like you have no time. And then other times you're incredibly bored because everything's going well and you don't know what to do with yourself. And you have to have these areas where you can go and find rest. You have to have these things for yourself that kind of fill you back up. Because when problems happen in ministry, it doesn't really matter how you're feeling. It doesn't matter how much rest you have. The thing is there, and it has to be handled. But the problem with any kind of self-care, which I encourage everybody in here to have some form of self-care in their life, is that there's just not enough time for it, it feels like. It feels like, I don't know where I'm going to fit that in. I know that thing will make me feel better, will kind of raise my energy levels up for the week, but I don't know where to fit that in because things come up. And I'm in a season right now, and will be for quite some time, where I have very limited time. Typically my day starts at maybe 6 or 7, depending on what job I have that day. And then I go to a local school and I substitute teach. And I never know how that's going to go. Sometimes I'm at an elementary school and it's really cute and fun. Sometimes I'm at a middle school and I'm very confused on what's going on and what's happening. Or I'm at a high school and I'm a little intimidated about what they're talking about, or even telling them that, focus on your work. And it's this day that's filled with, different things all day. But after that, then because I have to make a certain amount of money each week for us to pay our bills, I'll go deliver food. And so after that, I'll be running around town delivering food, and that comes with its own challenges because on the food delivery app that I work in, sometimes they don't tell you, like, hey, you need a code for the gate to get into this building. Or, hey, it's actually not the building that it's sending you to. I know that's an abandoned warehouse. It's on the other side of that wooded area. And so it's an adventure every day, and I wear my hiking boots. But, then after that, I do classes in the evening from about 5:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And then after that, are you getting tired yet? Then after that, I come home and we have a 2-month-old baby. So, I got to give my wife a little bit of a break. She's been home all day with her soon-to-be 3-year-old and our 2-month-old. And so then I eat dinner as quickly as I can, maybe watch some TikToks, and then I rush into the room and try to, hope and pray that our baby goes to sleep very quickly. And then when she goes to sleep, I just sit there in the darkness thinking, I can't wait to do this all again tomorrow. But in all honesty, I like being busy. I think it's fun. I love running around and all that stuff. But, in order for me to do what I need to do for my different jobs and for my family and to be the person that I believe God has called me to be, I do need to find rest. I do need to make sure that I am the best version of myself, regardless if I'm walking into a school or I'm taking classes at night or I'm with my family or I'm delivering a sermon on a Sunday. And so I need enough rest, but how would I find rest in such a busy week? If you know, tell me. I need to know. But I think it's something we all struggle with. Time has this like clock in the back of our mind, or maybe it's looming over behind us, and it's like ticking and ticking and ticking and ticking, and we're rushing. It makes us rush. Like, I got to get to this next thing. I need to do this other thing. Or maybe we're thinking about that appointment that's coming up, or whatever it is. But time is this thing that really does govern our lives. I mean, it really matters. It's kind of this thing that's looming over us all the time. But it gets worse. When we wake up in the morning, there's another clock that starts. And this is going to be the bad before the good, but just hang in there with me. Psychologists have done a lot of studies recently, and they found out that because of the modern world and technology has enabled us to make more decisions a day and get more things done, there's an estimated 35,000 decisions that we make a day. Does that sound like a lot to you? Because that sounds like a lot to me. But it's, whether I'm going to brush my teeth in the morning, I do all the time, I promise. Whether I'm going to get that second cup of coffee, or what I'm going to wear, or what I'm going to do here. And we have this weird clock in our brains where each decision we make, we're kind of pulling from that fuel tank. We're pulling from that fund of being able to even make proper decisions. And this is why a lot of the tech guys in San Francisco or Palo Alto, they wear the same shirt, the same pants, the same shoes every single day. Now, I don't think that it's the same exact one, but it's the same color, it's the same brand, it's the same thing, because they figure they get to eliminate that decision making because they have to make decisions all day. And there was a recent study done that was incredibly interesting about a parole board. And so they were studying this parole board that had 3 men that were doing time in prison. And 2 of them were there for fraud, and 1 was there for assault. And so as they went throughout the day, 2 of them, even though all 3 of them have served the same amount of time, just 2 of them have the same sentence and 1 has a different one. And basically, they went throughout the day, and only 1 of them got early parole. Now, 2 of them have the same case, so that's a little odd, but the one that got early parole was the one for fraud early in the morning. The one that didn't get with the same sentence, same everything, didn't get early parole was later in the afternoon. And so what does that tell us? Well, that tells us probably if you're getting a surgery or going to see the doctor, go early in the morning. Go early in the morning, that's your best bet. If you need to get a loan for something, go to the bank late in the afternoon. Really late in the afternoon when they're watching the clock and trying to get out of there, because you might get a better deal. But this clock, it's always ticking. It's always ticking in the background. Are you feeling stressed out yet? There's so many decisions to make every day, and it begs that question, is there really any time for rest? Because we know research being done recently on over 200,000 adults that men who get less than 8 hours of sleep a night actually live 5 years less than those that do. So if you rest and you take care of yourself, you actually get more time. For women, it's only 2, so don't worry, you're good. But, the third of adults that cut their sleep short, they end up having a lot of health problems, whether it's dementia or heart attack, diabetes. And the scary part is the average sleep of Americans is about 6 hours a night. I mean, that's the reality that we live in. That's the world that we live in. And I'm not saying that's all of us in here, but it's still, these are people that we're running into each and every day. These are the people that are on the roads with us when we're driving our cars and they've had a long day or they haven't had enough sleep. We live in a world that needs rest. But what does it do? We know that it impacts our physical health. Studies show it impacts our emotional health, and our mental health is, of course, tied to that as well. But as Christian people, maybe the question we should ask is, what does it do to our spiritual health? What does a lack of rest do to our spiritual health? And is that any kind of indicator as to why the church is the way it is right now in the West? If we see anything negative, if we see anything wrong, could that be because we're not resting well? We're not resting as we should. And very truthfully, there probably just isn't enough time in some of our lives to rest well. That's just a reality. Some of us are incredibly busy. Some of us have a lot of different things going on, and we're in seasons where it's like, Jesus, take the wheel. I need to get to the other side. But there is a type of rest that we're going to see today from Jesus that is limitless. It doesn't require more time. It doesn't require more. It's just a thing that he can give us. It's something that we can lean into in the midst of a busy day, in the midst of a busy schedule. And so we're in the Gospel of Mark today. We've been in the Gospel of Mark for some time, but we've talked about the context. But the context of really the scripture that we're talking about today is that Jesus has lived a normal life for 30 years. Well, relatively normal. But he understands what a hard day's work is. Being a carpenter, working with his hands, he knows what it's like to be tired. He knows what it's like to have a deadline, to have to get something done so he can get a paycheck and get food on the table. He understands that. But now, the thing that he's been waiting for, this calling into ministry, this calling to reveal his Father to the world, has come in our context today. And he only has 3 years to usher in the kingdom of God. Only 3 years. I mean, is that really enough time? That seems like a pretty daunting task. And I think what's very interesting is the way that Jesus goes about this. He doesn't go on throughout the Gospels like a chicken running around with his head cut off. He goes through it very peacefully. He goes through it very methodically, and he knows what he's doing all the time. He always seems like as if he's in control, at least in control of the direction that he's going in. So did Jesus look at time differently than we do? I believe that he did. I believe that he does in our own lives. And so in verse 36, I'm going to jump into the middle of it. Later, Simon and the others went out to find him. When they found him, they said, "Everyone is looking for you." So we know that reading the scripture before, Jesus went out to an isolated place to pray. And really in the Greek, we understand that this is before light was even out. So it's very early in the morning. And this is coming after the night before that's in the scripture where he was up very late, healing people and casting out demons. So he gets up before his disciples. They slept in. I just want to point that out. They slept in while he's out doing something else. They're the ones that slept in, and then they go out and find him, and they're like, "Hey, everybody's looking for you. What are you doing?" And naturally, I understand where they're coming from. They saw a lot of cool stuff the night before. They saw all these amazing things, and so they're like, "Hey, let's get back on it. Like we're well rested. We slept in. I don't know what you've been doing, but let's get back to it. Let's do some more cool stuff." And of course, they want to see amazing stuff. But the Christian life, I think, calls us to see what's happening here. These disciples, they're making a mistake that I think we do in our own lives. It's almost like we have this metaphorical stick, whether it's with our prayer, our worship, our Bible reading, whatever we consider our Christian spirituality, and we're poking Jesus all the time like, "Hey, move, do something cool. Do something big in my life. Do this thing." But I think what Jesus is showing us in this text is something even bigger than him just showing up and doing a miracle. I think he's showing them how to gain access to rest, to something incredibly important for the human life that Jesus examples. And so Jesus, he's giving us a hint into what real rest looks like. And I think that as American Christians, we often treat our discipleship of being disciples like Jesus, it's one more thing to do. You know, reading my Bible is one more thing to do. Going to church on Sunday, I could really get more work done, or I could sleep in. But instead I have to do this, and it's one more thing to do. And I think that's natural for the world that we live in. But what Jesus is trying to show us in this text is the way that he teaches. He teaches us in such a way where he says, look, just watch me. But if the Christian life is just one more thing to do, why did Jesus go out and do one more thing? You know, what is he doing that's so significant? And I'm reminded of a movie that I really love. Has anybody in here seen Karate Kid, the original one? Couple? Very, don't call on me. I'm not going to call on anybody. You can just throw that thing up there. Well, the Karate Kid, I love that movie, right? Partly because I have this weird fantasy about the 80s and how cool I think it was. I wasn't there, I don't know. Some of you may have been, but you all look pretty young in here. But I love the 80s, and I love Karate Kid. I love the first one. And when he's learning how to fight, because he got bullied and beat up pretty bad, he seeks out this older teacher, this karate master. And he's thinking he's going to learn all these cool moves to beat up the people that are bullying him. And instead, he ends up doing chores. And when you're watching the movie, you're feeling as the kid is feeling. You're like, okay, wax on, wax off. That would be like a good car cleaning commercial. But what does that have to do with fighting? Or painting a fence, or trimming a bush or a tree. And we're all sitting there when we're watching the movie. We're like, is he going to learn how to fight, or is he just going to do chores? And I think that Christian spirituality has kind of become that. It's like we're just doing chores instead of remembering that we're under instruction. And I think we can be kind of blinded to it. We think, well, no, I have to look this way to be a Christian. If I do this, and I do that, and I do this thing over here, I'm good. I did all my chores. I'll get my allowance of eternal life eventually. But the Christian life, Christian spirituality, is really watching what Jesus does in the Gospels and learning from it. Really, the goal of the Christian life is to be made in the image of Jesus. It's not to be made in the image of whatever a Christian looks like in America in our context right now, or whatever a Christian looks like in whatever context you're in. It's to look like Jesus. That's the goal. And so, do we see our Christian life as one as watching, learning, and then doing, or are we just doing chores for Jesus? Because if you're living a Christian life doing chores, I'm telling you, that's not the right way to do it. That's not how we're called to walk out this Christian life. And so jumping back to verse 35, before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Now, this is the whole conversation that we're having today. He chooses prayer over sleeping in. Why does he do that? He could have just slept in like his disciples. He could have slept in. He could have got more rest that way, the rest that we understand, but he chooses prayer. And I don't know about you, but maybe to me, the first time reading this text, I'm thinking, well, prayer sounds like even more work. You know, it's more words, it's more decisions made on what to pray about. I don't know if you've ever been there praying and you're like, God, I don't know how to make this sound good. I'm going to pray for world peace, I guess. Or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. Like, where, prayer sometimes is filled with, what am I supposed to pray about? I know I'm supposed to pray. This is my allotted time to pray. What do I pray about? But it just sounds like more. It sounds like more in this text. And I think we often think of prayer as these primary types, but he's really illustrating a different kind of prayer that we're going to get to. But we think of prayer as really these 5 types. It's supplication, thanksgiving, adoration, confession, and intercession. And really these primary types of prayer, we practice this as a church every Monday. Every Monday at 11 a.m., we're in the chapel over there, and we practice them because it is important to practice these different types of prayer because we have to know what our heart is calling out to God for, whether it's thanksgiving or intercession or whatever it is. And that practice does make perfect. It makes us into the perfect image of Jesus. But the prayer that Jesus is talking about, the prayer that Jesus is exempling, is incredibly different than those 5 types. It's off the beaten path a little bit. And this prayer that he's talking about, there are these deep waters of rest that we can draw from the heart of God. And it's this very interesting thing. But prayer, there's good ways to do it, there's bad ways to do it. And Jesus even illustrates that later on in his ministry where he says these 2 different men go to the temple to pray. One's a Pharisee, a perfect religious person. And he goes there and it's a prayer of thanksgiving. And I'm paraphrasing. But he goes there with a prayer of thanksgiving. He says, God, thank you for making me like this. Thank you for making me better than other men. Thank you for making me better than this other guy that's here praying too. And, he has this prayer of thanksgiving of, how great God has made him. And then there's the tax collector in the story. And the tax collector, very humbly, doesn't even want to look up, is praying and says, God, have mercy on me. Have mercy on a sinner like me. And so we have a prayer of thanksgiving and we have a prayer of confession. But the religious person is praying for the intention of getting more from God. His intention is to gain more honor for himself. Look at how amazing I am. Thank you for doing it, God, but look, I'm amazing. And the guy praying for confession, he's praying for God. He's saying, God, I don't want to be separated from you anymore by my sin. God, I want to be in your presence. Prayer may look like confession sometimes. It may look like thanksgiving. But what prayer actually is, the heart of prayer, is communion with God. Prayer is time with God in his presence where a word doesn't even have to be spoken. Prayer is a moment where you're with him and you're acknowledging in your heart, in the depths of yourself, that you belong to someone. You belong somewhere, and not just to the busy schedule you have in your life. Jesus is finding rest with God. Rest from his troubles, rest from exhaustion, rest from a wicked world. And he's doing all this because these are things he's facing. But in the presence of God, those things don't exist. Those things cannot draw a breath. This type of rest that Jesus is showing us in his word today, it's this type of spiritual breathing. Sometimes spiritually we need a breath because physically we're exhausted. Sometimes spiritually we need a breath just to give us more life, just to keep us going, because physically or mentally or emotionally, we don't know if we can go any further. This breath, it gives us new life. And I got to say, the majority of my prayers all day long, sometimes there's no words spoken. Sometimes it might just be a groan. It might just be like, ugh, or, oh, God, please just let me be in your presence in this moment. Whether it's in a car and I'm delivering someone some very tasty food that I don't get to eat. Or, whether it's at class and I'm learning things that are a little bit beyond me and they're saying, you'll get there. And I'm like, we'll see. Or after the baby goes to sleep and I'm sitting in that chair in the dark and I'm just like, God, can I just be with you for a second right now? Can I just be with you for a moment? This type of prayer is rest. It's these deep waters that really can fill us up again. And it's actually the way that we're supposed to live the Christian life. This is what Jesus is exempling. He doesn't sleep in. He doesn't get more physical rest. He says, really, if I'm going to do what I need to do in the short amount of time that I have, I need a spiritual breath. I need to take this spiritual rest with my Father. But something else happens in this type of prayer, in this type of rest that we can get from God, which is really interesting. And it's in verse 38 through 39. Jesus replied, we must go on to other towns as well, and I will preach to them too. That is why I came. And so he traveled through the region of Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. Now here's the thing. Jesus very practically, very logically could have set up camp exactly where he was, and people from those other towns, those other regions would have came to him for prayer or for healing, for getting demons cast out of them. He could have not traveled all that way. But yet in this situation, in this place of isolation, he gets direction from God on what he's meant to do, on what he's supposed to do. And it shows us, it reveals to us that we need this rest in the presence of God, this type of prayerful rest, in order to get clarity about our own lives. See, we want to be people that live lives with God-directedness. Because if we're not, our lives are going to be directed by our own wants, desires, or whatever helps us get through the day. Or if not, it'll be directed by other people that have power or authority over us, whether it's at work or somewhere else. Clarity, this type of clarity that God offers in that rest, it provides us rest from the rat race that we find ourselves in. It provides us rest from that wheel that we're continually running on. And we want to live God-directed lives, because a God-directed life is a life of intention, it's a life of purpose, but it's also a life of rest. A life that is not directed by God can often omit rest, as many of us know. And I've shared this illustration before, but it's something that's always on my mind. It's always in my heart. It's something that impacted me. But, I heard this story about a man going to heaven, and he meets Jesus, and Jesus is excited to meet him. And he says, look, I have something to show you. I have a gift for you. And he takes the man over to a painting, and it's a black and white painting, and the man's looking at it, and he says, man, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Is this my life? This looks very familiar. And Jesus says, this is your life. Look at how beautiful you are. Look at how beautiful your life is. And as they're sitting there admiring this painting, the man looks over the painting and sees a different one a little further on. And he goes, what is that? And Jesus says, oh, do you want to see that one as well? And this one is the same painting, but it's full of colors. It's full of colors that the man has never seen. He says, this is the most beautiful thing I think that I have ever seen. He says, what is this? Why doesn't my life look this way? Why does it look more black and white? And he says, we have this opportunity. You had this opportunity to live a God-acknowledged life where you acknowledged me, and I was able to really love your life and love the beauty in your life and how beautiful I think you are. But you also had this opportunity to live a life with me, a life full of color, a life full of a different direction, where the brushstrokes look a little bit differently on your day-to-day life. See, we can live lives regardless, God-acknowledged or God-directed, and they'll still be beautiful to God. God will still love you. He's not going to love you any less, but our lives can be filled with so much more beauty if it's God-directed. Our lives can be so much more beautiful if we are going to a place of rest with God and getting that type of clarity. God, what should I do about this in my relationship? What should I do about this with my job? God, what is the purpose of me being in this season or this situation? God really does provide that. I'm standing here today telling you that he does because I've seen it. I've seen it and I've experienced it, and I can't explain it. I can't tell you, oh, it made sense that this was the logical next step. A lot of the steps that I've taken in my life seemed very illogical to me, but they were God-directed, and so there was some courage and confidence behind that. I think that we can also find clarity in this rest, and the big idea today really is that the Lord offers us rest and clarity in this type of prayer. So what should you do about this? I think, firstly, you should just ask yourself, what does my prayer life look like? I mean, am I consistently praying? What does it look like? Does it feel like I'm doing more chores, more Christian chores, or does it feel like I'm seeking the presence of God? Is it always me trying to get something from God, or is my time of prayer trying to be there for God, to be with him? Prayer is not work, but communion with God. It's spiritual breathing, and it's this breath that gives us the rest we desperately need in our lives. And so I think we need to begin practicing restful prayer. And if we do that, especially as a community, it's going to change everything. This church not only is going to be the most rested church in Macon, Georgia, hopefully. Hopefully all the churches get this type of rest. But we'll also be a church that's being God-directed. We're fulfilling God's purposes through this church and through this community, and not whatever purposes we might concoct or draw up. We could be a real community that is following God's purposes in our homes, our workplaces, and our communities. I think our lives would have the added beauty of God to them, those different brushstrokes of color. The Lord, he offers us rest and clarity in prayer. Let's pray.